Hello and welcome to the Tech for Climate podcast. I'm Guillaume, your host, and each week I'm fortunate to share with you stories from climate tech founders, investors, and corporations sharing their unique insights into this fast-moving industry. Eventually, like me, you will learn, discover, and get inspired by those unique men and women who are contributing to the fight against climate change, and I hope it will help you to take a step in this formidable movement. So before we start, I just want to share a few words about us, as this podcast is just the tip of the iceberg of what we do at Startup Basecamp to support the climate tech movement. Our mission is to accelerate capital deployment towards climate tech founders, allowing them to focus on scaling their solutions. How do we do that? Every day, we help founders access to resources and connection and gain the visibility they need to expand their growth. We do this in a number of ways with a membership platform, a Slack group with a growing number of founders, investors, and experts from around the world. And recently, we went one step further with the matching services to connect founders with top climate tech investors. Keep in mind that we are able to do all of this thanks to the support of our listeners and our members. So please like and subscribe, share one episode with a friend, join a community, and if you haven't already done so, make a small donation to support our work. It really means the world to us. And now, enjoy the show! Hi everyone, during this new episode of our Founder Series, we sat down with Allison Wolff, CEO at Vibrant Planet. Vibrant Planet is a tech platform that is accelerating fire-prone forest resiliency worldwide. They have created an online platform for landscape restoration that helps land managers plan in more fire-prone ecosystems. Allison grew up in Colorado with issues in forest fires and pine beetles in her backyard. After a successful career in tech in Silicon Valley, she started gravitating more toward climate issues, and it wasn't until after the Paradise Fire that she really dove into how to regenerate the forest in the West that had been mismanaged for so many years. California, indeed, is losing 6% of its forest per year, and Allison traced this down partially to a data and communication problem. So she set out to create a platform that facilitated the monitoring and reporting of this rapidly changing ecosystem. In this episode, Allison starts off by explaining what nature-based solutions are and how she has created a tech product to enable them. She goes on to explain the natural challenges nature-based solutions face, along with those faced by analytic as a service products. In doing so, she sets out how she created a product while ensuring a beautiful UX and the economics of nature-based solutions. During the second part of the discussion, Allison gives tips on how to fundraise for nature-based solutions, service and product while maintaining a good work-life balance. She also gives a book recommendation based on project she has worked on. Allison, welcome to the show. Hi, Allison. Welcome to the Tech for Climate podcast. I'm super happy to have you here with us today. I believe it's going to be a great opportunity to hear your story and learn more about your exciting adventure and journey to unlock nature-based climate solutions by accelerating wildland resiliency with Vibrant Planet. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Guillaume. Excited to be here.
So before we start, can you give us a 30-second introduction about Vibrant Planet?
Yeah, Vibrant Planet is a tech platform that is accelerating forest resilience, right now focused on fire-prone forests worldwide. There's about a little more than half of land worldwide it needs fire in some way to cycle nutrients, cycle carbon, and to regenerate. And so we're focused on that type of ecosystem at the moment.
So let's start from the top. Can you tell us a bit more about your personal story, background? I mean, what are you passionate about? What do you love to do besides building a vibrant planet? I mean, what makes you feel inspired or like your best self? As I always ask, like, who is Alyssa?
So, I grew up in Colorado in the Rocky Mountains. I now live in the Lake Tahoe area, and uh, I am very, very passionate about nature and watching it change rapidly in front of our eyes with wildfire. Um, my old stomping grounds as a kid in the Rockies up above the Boulder and Denver area was swept with bark beetle kill, just dead trees, little matchsticks as far as you could see from an airplane. Watching that happen now where I live in Lake Tahoe area. So um, really passionate about nature. I spend a lot of time in it, hiking and mountain biking and backcountry skiing and snowshoeing. You name it, I do it outside daily. And yeah, just very, very passionate about that. I'm also a mother of a 14-year-old girl who is incredibly wise and passionate about her own topics, and just very passionate about raising my daughter to be a good citizen in this crazy world.
So, thanks for sharing all of those more like personal story and passion on your side. We're looking a little bit preparing the interview, looking about like your work-life experience. Very impressive. A lot of like big names as well. Netflix early days around the year 2000, and you mentioned it was still the year where DVDs were like sent over to the client. You worked there, then you also worked with or for Google, Facebook. So a lot of like those big names in the tech industry, but during that whole journey and work life experience, I mean, what are the maybe like the one or two pieces of like experience in a way that give you edge to start the company?
Yeah, good question. So a lot of my career was working with some of those big brands you just named on sustainability. So really thinking about, especially the biggest footprint for tech companies is data centers. And so working with Google and Facebook especially, really, really helping to think about um, data center efficiency, how those data centers are powered, trying to move, basically accelerate the greening of the American grid through all kinds of coalition building. So with data center efficiency, we at both companies we started a effort called OCP, Open Compute Project, that really became a space race between tech companies to create the most efficient data center. And part of the deal was you had to open source whatever you cracked. And so there were eventually 300 companies working on data center efficiency and sharing what they were doing so that others could replicate. So that had a huge impact on the energy use of all of the applications that we use. And then started really thinking about what are the strategies for making renewable energy less expensive than fossil fuels. And so um, started to help build alliances that would go into especially coal-based states and say, we will bring these many jobs, this much philanthropy, this much of a tax base, but you got to let us green the grid. And so that really did play a role, I think, in some of the tipping point on the cost of renewable energy falling below fossil fuels, and therefore a tipping point. So in doing some of that work, and then also work around movement building during COP21, the Paris climate talks, really experimenting with what moves people on climate change from denialism to wanting to take action. How do you message about climate change so people understand the issue, how big it is, and what they can do? So lots of experimentation there. Um, Launching data for good programs, those kinds of things at those companies. The big learning there is that platform plays have this enormous ripple effect in terms of impact. And so I really started to see my role on, how do we tilt these platforms towards good. Obviously had some big wins and then some really big frustrations, as you can imagine, with the way some of those companies have behaved in the world. But really saw the power of that. And so when I started to see the need for restoration in forests and the need to accelerate restoration in order to unlock nature-based solutions, um, I immediately went to this has to be a platform play, where you're building and leveraging data that exists to support uh, the problem at hand, and also just make sure that people understand what's at stake, what can be done. So a lot of that is data visualization, education, and just really good product design as well, and broad engagement. So anyway, very much leveraged the experience I had before to build what we've built today.
So I always ask to the different guests that we have on the show, like, and you mentioned clearly your path within the tech world was really working in this sustainability department, or like and then being advocate for the different, like, or at least the COP 21, as you mentioned, and different things. But do you have like an probably also again, maybe you give part of the answer here, mentioning like this humongous, like wildfire that happened in California, and especially close by to you in Lake Tahoe, seeing this all the forest destroyed. Is all of those little elements or big elements have been like for you like this key moment to, in a way, push you and motivate you even more to start into the climate tech ecosystem, or do you have more like a specific aha moment that you can define?
Well, so as I was doing the work in the tech sector around energy efficiency and renewable energy that I mentioned, I was also supporting the launch of Drawdown with Paul Hawken, and doing a little bit of work on regenerative ag, and beginning to get more and more passionate about, okay, we're reaching the point, the tipping point on renewable energy finally, and um, how are we now going to pull all the carbon down that's sitting up there, right? Carbon sits in the atmosphere for 100 years, methane, even more powerful of a greenhouse gas. And really started to look through the helping with the launch of Drawdown, started to understand the power nature-based solutions are going to play, and that they are by far the most immediate solution we have, and they have all these lovely co-benefits like clean water and clean air and biodiversity and habitat and things like that, that of course are really important as well as the climate. So became very passionate about that space, was really trying to figure out what I wanted to do in that space, wanted to move over into it. And then I started working with a impact investor that moved to the Tahoe area, and basically just wanted to figure out how do we take on a topic in the Tahoe area that could have global impact. And they were contemplating building like a Aspen Institute type center where you could bring people together around specific topics. So I essentially went on a listening tour in the area just to talk to anyone who would talk to me in the scientific community, all types of community leaders, mayors, and county leads, and folks like that. Talked to folks I had worked with in the climate science world as well, like Catherine Hayhoe and Michael Mann and some others, to just really understand at the local level, but also broader global level, what could such a center take on that would be unique. Um, and pretty climate focused family, thinking about this. And I, of course, I was at the point in my career where I only wanted to work on climate solutions. So as I'm doing this work, we had the Paradise Fire. We then had the 2018 fire season, which was the worst anyone could imagine in the West at the time. And that was all anyone would talk about. And so here I had grown over the previous couple of years very passionate about nature-based climate solutions. And now I'm seeing the Western US blow up in fire. And so I started to really dig into why is this happening? What is the actual intersection of climate change and land management history that is creating this mess? And can we do something about it? Or is the future that California just really isn't going to have forests? Which is what I was hearing. So that was the aha where, then I started digging into conversations with Forest Service folks, BLM folks, folks at CAL FIRE, which is California's fire agency, other emergency response groups, and scientists that were really working in the ecology space. And that's where I realized that there is something we can do. We can actually go into these forests and restore the structure that they used to have before European Americans essentially screwed them up. And I can get into that a little bit. And they will make it through climate change. And then they will help us make it through climate change. So really saw the need to unlock that solution, and it's happening very slowly. So right now, in California, the science is that if we continue with the status quo, California is not going to have forests in the next couple of decades, and that's really hard to imagine with California's majestic trees. But it's happening very quickly, right? Like we're losing like 6% per year, and that's compounding. And the fire is becoming so severe that the forests are not growing back. They're not able to reseed. And so we have to accelerate the process of restoration. That starts with fixing very slow conflict-ridden planning processes that can take 5, 10, 15 years to get multiple jurisdictions to agree on a plan that can go to permit. And often those plans get litigated and then nothing happens. And so we've got a very broken planning process. And that's what I saw is that's a technology problem. It's a data problem, and it's a communication problem. And so that was the big aha of really needing to build a platform that solves those things, as well as monitoring and reporting so that we know what's working. Because at this point, things are changing so quickly, we have to be adaptive. So, and there's no understanding, there's no way to understand or get insights on what treatment mix are actually working and helping forests make it through severe fire and tree mortality from drought and those kinds of things that they're facing.
Before we go too much into detail of Vibrant Planet, I like to take a little zoom out here and go back a little bit on the natural based climate solution landscape today. So maybe to start and to put things back into perspective, could you maybe share with us a definition or your definition of like what is the natural based climate solution? What are they? Because it's definitely something that we hear that more like sometimes as a buzzword, but what is really a natural based solution?
Sure. So really, nature-based solutions are nature pulls carbon down with or without us. So vegetation, obviously through photosynthesis, whether that's a plant in ag lands or whether it's a tree, they're pulling carbon out of the sky to feed themselves, right? They through photosynthesis produce sugars that they're feeding themselves with. And so they're very powerful drawdown machines that exist today. That carbon gets stored in soil. So the plant above ground is eating the carbon and then it's storing it through its root systems into the soil. And so we have these massive carbon sinks, both in the vegetation and then in the soil underneath. And you can imagine tree roots, especially in dry forests, they have to go very, very deep into the ground to tap water. And so often in fire-prone forests where we're focused, more than half the tree is under the ground. You can't see it. And so there's these deep repositories of carbon. Other nature-based solutions include oceans. The ocean is pulling down vast amounts of carbon for us. And so the nature-based solution space is really focused on restoring damaged lands and coastlines, and then ideally taking ecologically sound, scientifically sound options. Let me say that over. So basically using the best science we have available to actively implement solutions. So, for example, in oceans, where can we plant more kelp beds? And we can do oyster farming and other nature-based solutions that are both helping with the resilience of coastlines. So oyster beds can help when waves get big; they can be a barrier for impacts. Right, it's an adaptation, and the kelp is pulling carbon down. And so that's an example of an ocean-based, nature-based solution, where you're actively planting kelp, but you want to do that only where kelp would naturally grow. And ideally, we're restoring where it used to be and where it's no longer growing for some ecological kind of damage that's happened. In land, so in forests where we're focused right now, the story, especially in Western forests, but this is really a worldwide problem. Um, the forests in the Western U.S. Were basically self-managed for 20,000 years. So lightning would strike, and there was also a great deal of cultural fire. So native tribes were burning almost every inch of the West. And so fire was rolling through this land, very, very low intensity fire, cleaning a forest floor, killing off baby trees so that the forest had the right trees per acre, sort of calling itself down. And then, like I said, in fire-prone forests, this is how carbon cycles and how nutrient cycle. It's different than a tropical forest. And so in the Western US, but Europe before that, Australia, some of the other fire-prone lands, we played the Lorax out. We cut everything. There's only in the Western US, for example, there's only about 5% old growth left. And that's hard for us to imagine. We can't, the forests that we see today look nothing like what European Americans arrived to. And so we disrupted the natural structure at that point about 150 years ago. We cut everything to basically build mines, railroads, and towns. Everything was built of wood. The whole American economy was built on the back of wood. And so that was sort of a reset button. We also removed indigenous peoples, and they were tending the forest with fire. And so that fire adaptivity, that the people were living in the ecosystems, and burning was a big part of life. And so removing that good fire was a big mistake. That was kind of mistake number two after cutting everything down. And then mistake number three was suppressing fire in lands that are starved for fire. And so we've been getting better and better at that. After World War II, we started to use warplanes to dump retardant and water on fire. We put almost every fire out. You don't even hear about fires. 98% of fires are extinguished within a few feet of run. We're so good at it. But the detriment is these forests can't regenerate without it. They can't cycle carbon, they can't cycle nutrients, and so they're dying. And they are also hazardously overfueled. And so now, if a fire strikes, whether it's a campfire that gets out of control or a lightning strike, it now can grow to a catastrophic fire. So we've got all these ladder fuels in these way overgrown forests. The fire gets picked up from the ground where it would have stayed and been a low intensity regenerative fire. And it goes up to the canopy, and then we've got climate fueled winds. And those winds are pushing fire at speeds we've never seen before. And so what's happening increasingly is this very high severity fire that kills the forest. It doesn't regenerate it. It wipes it out. It sterilizes the seeds, and it wipes out all the ecosystem services. So water is at stake. We have landslides after big fires that have trillions of dollars of impact annually, dredging reservoirs with sediment because there's nothing to hold the soil. The carbon sinks are getting wiped out. They're releasing massive amounts of carbon during the fire as well, and then we lose them permanently. So, and then we're losing habitat. So our spotted owl packs where I live are burning up. Eagle nest, those kinds of things. So, and then of course that wall of fire can hit a town and take out a town, like the Paradise example, or the Caldor fire that came close to where I live, wiped out several towns before it came into the basin. So, so we we've got to basically restore the ability for these forests to handle fire. Um, by restoring them, they can also we're maintaining habitat. We're keeping those roots in place to keep sediment from going into reservoirs and streams. And then we're also keeping those carbon sinks intact. And so that's in terms of nature-based solution. Our work is to basically restore forest structure so that it's in sort of a natural range of variability, we call it, but also will last in a future range of variability. Like, how do we make sure these forests are going to make it through higher temperatures and lower precipitation, which is a reality.
So, in terms of nature-based solution, and I would say like the potential of like capturing and storing greenhouse gas and therefore like here on this case CO2, what are, according to you, like which are the most promising or most efficient one, or is it really based on each like area and sector and geography in the world, that each one is like more the optimum way of working, or do you see like one or two area where we should maybe invest more effort? Like, I mean, you mentioned here forest, and especially after wildfire. Do you see any others, like you were mentioning kelps? Like, do you see any others where really like we should put probably more like time, effort, and resource to accelerate the restoring of those lands, and therefore like developed and like the deployment of those nature-based solution?
Yeah. So we've talked about forests restoring, um, dry forests, fire-prone forests is crucial. Um, the the tropical forest problem is a different picture. Tropical forests don't need active management. We just need to leave them alone. And so, in places like the Amazon or the DRC, we need to figure out ways, and we have been struggling with this for decades now. How do we incentivize farmers to keep forests intact, and how do we stop illegal logging? And so if we leave the Amazon alone, it's just fine. But we're reaching a tipping point with the Amazon, especially where if the science tells us that if we lose more than 80% of its historic forest cover, it will tip into a mass dieback where most of the forest will very rapidly die off and become dry and fire prone in a place where there isn't supposed to be fire. And so we're at 81% of historic forest cover in the Amazon. We have 1% to go. And we need to race against time to figure out the solution. So there's lots of people working on that problem to try to incentivize farmers to keep at least 80% of their land forested, and pay them for that service through carbon credits mostly. And then so that's sort of the range of the forest problem. Our world is restoring fire-prone forests to safeguard carbon and other ecosystem services. Tropical forests, we just need to incentivize protection and leaving it intact. The boreal is sort of a mix. The parts of the boreal, parts of Alaska, for example, are becoming fire-prone, where we may have to do some thinning and management, where we haven't had to do that before. And then similar to the Amazon, there are other places in Alaska, for example, or other parts of the boreal we just need to protect and leave intact. The other really vast carbon sink on Earth are peatlands, and meadows. Like, even where I live in the Sierra Nevada, the meadows in the Sierra Nevada store as much carbon than Indonesian peatlands, but we continuously drain them and build on them. We're putting highways on them. We put neighborhoods on them. And so we have to change where we develop, and we have to understand the trade-offs of development from a much broader perspective than the way we make decisions today. And then the other really promising solution is regenerative ag. And so this is where we really need to move from extractive agriculture and lots of fertilizers and additives and move to a regenerative system that includes things like cover crops, compost, biochar. There's a kind of forest connection with biochar. We can produce lots of biochar that can land in ag lands and be a sponge for in both drought and flooding. It's this wonderful spongy nutrient add, basically. So soil, if we can restore soil, we're losing our topsoil. In fact, in most places in the world, we only have about 60 harvests left because of the extractive agriculture that we have been practicing. And so if we can restore soil by all of these additives, like compost, biochar, and cover crops, and we can bring animals and the nutrients from animals into soils, we can restore them, and they're vast carbon sinks. I mean, I heard a statistic once that if we were to restore the grasslands in the Midwest of the United States, it would pull all the carbon down that humans emit every year, like just that area of the U.S. So those grasslands and perennial grasses are like trees where they have these very, very deep, like 5-6 foot root systems. So they're pulling carbon way down into the ground. So all of those solutions excite me. And we need to move as fast as humanly possible to accelerate them.
Do you have any, out of curiosity, any data in terms of like what is the at capacity when all of those land are restored and really this nature-based solution, carbon sink, all the different panels and solutions that is existing out there are really like fully working in the ideal world. What would be like the capacity to really capture this carbon in terms of like compared to what we emit today?
Well, so forests globally, when they're healthy, pull down about 30% of the carbon humans emit. Grasslands are similar. I think the statistics vary there, but if we just restored grasslands and forests, we've dealt with 60% of the problem. And then you think about some of the ocean solutions like kelp beds, like I mentioned. I think I'm not sure what the percentage is that they pull down, but they're very powerful. And then, strategies to keep some of these peatlands and, the wetland areas intact, the avoided emissions of keeping those intact, all together. There's about so one of the books I was going to recommend is Drawdown, and if you read Project Drawdown, and they're constantly coming up with new solutions or studying new solutions and publishing about them. There are 16 nature-based solutions, land-based solutions to pull carbon down and methane, all the other greenhouse gases. They in combination blow away anything we can do in energy. And so they can solve the problem alone. Of course, we have to do all of it, right? We need to get off of fossil fuels. Women and girls empowerment is another one of the solutions in Drawdown. So population controls, all of those things. At this point we have to do it all. But that was one of the things that was really remarkable to me, just learning through the process of working with Paul and reading Drawdown, how powerful the land-based solutions are. And they're at our fingertips. They're right here. And like I said before, we get other benefits out of them, like biodiversity, which we forget we're dependent on having other species in the world. We get clean water, we get clean air if we're avoiding, catastrophic fire and the horrifically toxic smoke that comes from that, right? There's lots of other reasons to pursue nature-based solutions.
So, just a quick question to almost close this chapter of the interview. I'd like to understand maybe this the deployment of those solution or adoption, I would say, like, um, what are the regulation currently in place that are like in a way helping to support these those carbon solution, and maybe what are the missing one? I mean, what is blocking or slowing down to allow really like the nature-based solution to go mainstream, according to you?
Mm. So it depends on the context. Um, I think that the carbon credit, um, like forest carbon credits, as an example, but you can say the same in ag. Um, there's a lot of distrust. There's a lot of shenanigans happening, um, and a lot of that is a data problem. And creating the kinds of transparency that we need to understand the benefit of keeping a part of the Amazon intact. How do you value that? How do you make sure that you don't pay for something that then gets cut down the next year? So there's in the Amazon context, there's a lot of social, political, and global economic forces that are eroding trust and credibility. Um, and so what we can do now with remote sensing and data, we can see the tree level. We build really high resolution data in our system where we get sub 1 meter resolution, and we can see trees in 3 dimensions and understand a bunch of forest functions from that at the tree level. We can do the same. We're getting there with the Amazon. The canopy is so thick, it's hard. It's a harder problem in that tropical context. But we're getting the kind of data development and AI and machine learning to see forests at the tree level and understand really clear quantification of things like carbon value, but also biodiversity, water values. Um, so that part of the equation that has been a barrier until that technology had matured enough the last few years, that was one barrier that we can kind of check the box. Like we've got that now. So we can bring that level of visibility that brings some trust. Now we have to deal with the kind of social and political issues, and that's true in different contexts. Again, in the Amazon, we've got this global demand for beef that is causing us, soy feed for cattle worldwide and cattle grazing in a place that's a completely inappropriate crop to grow. And so we're clear cutting forests to grow soy to feed cows for Americans and Europeans that want to eat beef. And unfortunately, it's industrialized beef. There are ways to grow cattle that is actually a nature-based solution when you've got cattle working in a regenerative system. But the way we're doing it with industrialized ag is obliterating the rainforest. And so that's a big global social economic problem that we have to work internationally to solve. Barriers in the Western US and the wildfire problem, where we've started our work, is really just, people having a hard time with behavior change. We have to change the way we manage land. And federal government is by far the largest landowner in the Western US, ranges from 40 to 60% of land ownership. And the Forest Service is doing everything it can, and we work really closely with a lot of forest supervisors and even up to the chief, um, to really rethink how we plan, how we collaborate across jurisdictions, including tribal lands, as well as state and private forestry. How do you collaborate well across groups and build trust of NGOs that often use litigation to stop action? Because they're concerned about water quality, they're concerned about habitat getting cut down, they're concerned about a slippery slope to big logging, which we do have a history of. And so again, we've got the data and the machine learning and AI to tick the box of transparency. And that's part of what we're bringing to the table, is we can show you what's happening down to the tree level and help you plan and help bring those NGOs into the fold so that they don't litigate, so that they're part of the process and they can trust that the action is the right ecological action for that area. So that's really important. And then it's just policy change too. There's needs for mandates for reporting on treatment effectiveness and resilience trends and things like that, that the policy landscape has not caught up yet to the need to move very, very quickly before we lose everything. So we're trying to help accelerate some of that using data and storytelling and visualization, doing what we can, but it's really hard. People are not good at change.
That's definitely like change management is always a tricky one. So let's go a bit deeper now into Vibrant Planet. I mean, you already uncover quite a bit of the story. This maybe I'd like to hear a bit more about like this, gap, the initial gap that you identified in terms of like data and what was like missing for the local authorities, and especially like you're mentioning here in Tao, in terms of like forest management and like how to go further. So can you tell us maybe a bit more about this initial story of the company? I mean, why did Vibrant Planet have to exist?
Yeah, so in Western forests and fire-prone forests worldwide, so you can think about Mediterranean Europe. France had one of its largest fires, right, this year. Greece recently burned. Spain has a fire problem. Australia obviously has a huge fire problem. So in all of these areas, again, what I was seeing is this very conflict ridden, very slow planning process. And so fires are moving at, 60,000 acres, 100,000 acres, 2 million acres now because of that catastrophic fire problem I mentioned, where we've got this fuel load, these very unhealthy, overgrown forests. And so these fires are moving at these really large scales now that requires um, landowners to come together because it's crossing federal, state, and private lands and tribal lands. And so it's forcing collaboration, but there's no tool for collaboration. And so that was the big thing I saw is how do we help people communicate better and bring that transparency to a planning process to avoid litigation, be more inclusive in the process across jurisdictions, but also stakeholders that are concerned about things like owl habitat, so that they're part of the process. And so what I saw from a data perspective um, was basically a bunch of data silos and very low quality data. So the data to date, so we think we have really good data because you can zoom in on Google Earth, right? And you think you're seeing trees, but it's two-dimensional data. The fire problem is so vast now. So in the Western US, for example, we have 240 million acres across the Western states that are at risk of high severity fire. You can't walk 240 million acres and look at the forest, which is what's happening today. Like that's the process is you're physically out there, you're working with paper maps, and tools like ArcGIS, which are great. You can pull data layers into that tool, but then usually the output is a printed map and a bunch of people around a table drawing on it and arguing. Um, and so what's needed now is prioritization. And we have to do prioritization using remote sense data because we have to figure out where do we actually have some of these in-person processes? Where do we put boots on the ground? Where can we get the most bang for our buck? If we have limited dollars to spend to restore a landscape that's 1 million acres, let's say, where do we go to make sure we're getting the most benefit? And groups like the Forest Service and federal parks and state parks, they're always managing to avoid wildfire burning from their forest into a town. So they're trying to avoid losses to communities, but they're also always managing for carbon, water, biodiversity, recreation, right? That's where we play, is in Forest Service and BLM land. And so they have to have a multi-benefit planning process that requires really robust data to understand at the tree level forest function and then to be able to model different treatment scenarios. Where do we put prescribed fire? Where do we mechanically thin a forest that's overgrown? So we have to apply treatment mixes and then apply fire probabilities and climate probabilities to understand how would this treatment work over time. And so our system was built to basically solve that problem where we create very high resolution 3-dimensional tree data at 1 meter to 5 meter level, depending on what we can pull in. And then we normalize water biodiversity, carbon, recreation, population, and building infrastructure data to that tree approximate object. That's all packaged in a scenario building platform so that you can play with a whole bunch of different treatment scenarios, model them into the future, and understand how effective they would be in fire probabilities, in climate probabilities, flooding probabilities, drought-driven disease, other climate-driven problems. So, and you can imagine today in a paper-driven process where you have maybe one plan that you can't play with. You're not seeing data visualizations. You're not in an environment where you can imagine, right? Where you might have a do nothing scenario where in California, everything burns in 10 years. Or you maybe have one or two alternative plans in a very opaque process by an agency that is not trusted by an NGO that's really worried about habitat. And so, of course, they're going to sue and stop it. So we're basically solving multiple things at once. So it's the data transparency, robust data and data visualizations, the ability to create scenarios together and share them and compare them. And you can literally overlap to see where you have consensus. And then once treatment happens, monitoring. So we can see if there was a fire, you can monitor, the fire effects as treatments are happening. Are we actually achieving the objectives that we were shooting for? And then overall, how are landscapes trending? And what is the value of that in terms of avoided losses to all those ecosystem services that could potentially burn, as well as towns that could burn, but also, you think about insurance and utility, those kinds of issues. So that was the big need that we saw and that we solved. One of my first co-founding partners was at the remote sensing lab for the Forest Service, pulling in hyperspectral LiDAR data and satellite data and trying to hack at this. And he was having the realization that this was not possible inside government. And so part of why we founded the company is how can we partner with Forest Service scientists and labs who are doing awesome work and have awesome models, but bring Silicon Valley level engineering to build really, really robust data sets. So getting that tree approximate object data has required the combination of remote sensing experts like my partner Scott and amazing scientists like our chief scientist Hugh Safford, working really closely with some of the top machine learning engineers in the world to crack the kind of data that we need to actually drive the information in the system. So that was, the other ahas. We've got to bring these worlds together, basically, of science, forest management, and tech.
So in terms of that, I clearly grasp the large and big and ambitious mission that you guys are on, and I think there's like so many different pieces. On one side, I'd like to learn a little bit more about like how do you capture those data, and you just like uncover a little bit, but like you're able to have like data at the tree level. So are you guys now focused on one area in the US, or are you guys available everywhere, or at least in the entire US for now? How far are you in that process of like growing and achieving this larger vision that you guys have?
Yeah, so we've invested heavily in cracking this workflow to build these tree approximate objects, because that is the foundation. And the way we do that is we pull in publicly available hyperspectral LiDAR. So it's a specific type of LiDAR. LiDAR is flown today by planes. More and more, I think we'll be able to use drones. But these are flights that are commissioned by the feds or states like California, Oregon, Washington. And so we have LiDAR in a lot of different places. It's often spotty and it's a picture in time. So it's quickly outdated, especially now, right, with fires and drought-driven disease. But what we're able to do is pull in anything that's out there. And often these flights happen and that data is just sitting there and people don't know what to do with it. So much of the data problem is how do you turn data into useful information? So that's really what we're doing. So we're pulling in these publicly available data sets we train our algorithm on LiDAR. So LiDAR is like a laser where it's
Yeah.
seeing a forest down to the needle or the leaf, all the topography. There's a whole bunch of aspects that you can derive from LiDAR and get that three-dimensional view of a forest very, very accurately. We then are able to refurbish LiDAR that's out of date, like the mosquito fire that happened this year. While the fire was happening, we were refurbishing LiDAR that we had to look at how severe the fire burned and what the effects of that might be on that fire. That was another fire kind of near the Lake Tahoe area this year. And so we're able to do that. And then where LiDAR was never flown, where there's a complete gap, we're able to basically tree approximate objects for that area. Um, and we're able to get to like sub 5 meter resolution right now. That'll continue to get better as our inputs get better and our algorithm gets smarter. But that's good enough for planning purposes. So we invested heavily so that we now have the capability to point that machine anywhere in the world. And it's very tuned for fire-prone forest types. So the ones I mentioned in the Western U.S., in the in Mediterranean Europe, Australia, those forest types, but we can tune it for the Amazon, for the DRC. So we can apply it in other ecosystem types as well. We're now also extending that to grazing lands where we can restore grasslands as well that are adjacent to forests. So that was the big feat, was building that capability.
So in terms of reporting that you provide and different pathways of solution for the different local stakeholders and authorities and land manager, where are you at today? What kind of reporting? What are you able to give them? And in a way, how do they? What was their initial reaction? And seeing those people coming out of Silicon Valley, as you mentioned, with those reports and data, and maybe some recipe for them to act on A, B, or C. I mean, what was their initial reaction?
Yeah, so today the system is deployed and at work in the Central Sierra in about 1.5 million acres. And then it's within the next 6 months will be deployed in about 10 million acres in more of Northern California, Southern Oregon. And then we're starting to now move into some additional areas in Idaho and Colorado. And the the reaction's been interesting. So there are some folks that are a little threatened by it. Um, the team that we've brought in from the Forest Service and BLM and some of the agencies, EPA as well, we've got some really beloved, very credible scientists and land managers, and so you know, though there's some skepticism of Silicon Valley, folks coming in like myself and our CTO and our chief product officer, Neil Hunt, built Netflix. And so I think they're a little wary of that. Silicon Valley often says, we're going to save the day. And then it's, like an elephant squashing things. So I think there's sort of tepid excitement, I guess is what I would say, that we've gone through a very deep co-design body of work, working with dozens and dozens of land managers and scientists across the land management world, especially Forest Service folks and also emergency response teams, to inform the design of the system and then to continue to iterate it. And so I think now that we've got our first deployment out and people are seeing it at work, it's snowballing, and people are trusting it. They're realizing the data is high quality. They're realizing that it really does improve and speed up the collaborative planning process. And they're excited to be able to monitor and report back to whoever's providing funding, whether it's the feds or local community foundation or whoever, um, the use of funds, and their effectiveness, resilience trends, those kinds of things. So the value proposition's working, and now that we've kind of got it live and out there, it really is snowballing, and more and more landscapes are coming on board.
So do you have any paid clients so far? And who is your customers? I mean, who's paying you? I mean, what's the business model behind Vibrant Planet?
Yeah, so we sell the system as it's basically analytics as a service. And the people that use it are forest supervisors for the U.S. Forest Service at the local level. Um, they're fuels management teams, they're botanists, so they've got a bunch of different, hydrologists, a bunch of different scientific teams underneath the forest supervisor that runs that forest. Like the Tahoe National Forest is around 1 million acres. We've combined that with the Tahoe Basin Forest, which is a separate forest that's around Lake Tahoe, so that now we're crossing 3 connected watersheds, 3 different forests, and their teams, 2 utilities. PG&E is now a customer as well, and they're part of that landscape, as well as Nevada Energy on the Nevada side. And so yeah, so it's basically the customer is the paying customer are fire districts who have to do community wildfire protection plan updates every couple of years. There's a vast amount of federal funding that moves to the municipal level for that. So we have several fire districts in that landscape. We have several forest supervisors that are paying in through NGO partners typically, and then we also work with resource conservation districts, which are really interesting groups that were set up by the USDA a long time ago, mostly in the ag space, but they're very much playing ringleader and purse holder in forest management now, and really helping jurisdictions and NGOs come to a table to work together for exactly this problem. That's a new thing that's started to happen in the last couple of years. So we have 2 different contracts, for example, with resource conservation districts. Sometimes NGOs will form. So our work in Southern Oregon is with a group called SOFRIC, Southern Oregon Forest Restoration Collaborative. And so that's an NGO that has purchased our analytics as a service for the Forest Service that is up there, the Rogue Siskiyou system, as well as NGOs and tribal partners and others that are in the area. So that's where we're selling now at the local landscape by landscape level. And then we hope at some point we can work with the federal government. We are in conversations about ways we can support the USDA writ large, and Department of Interior, which is Bureau of Land Management, federal parks, some of the others too. So you can imagine eventually having more of an aggregated view, like for the
Mm-hmm.
Forest Service chief, of how are all my crisis landscapes doing? Are the treatments that we're moving billions of dollars to effective? He needs to report to Congress on what he's doing and how it's going. And so we really hope that we can over time support that. And in the meantime, we're basically helping at that ground level where permit happens, for where trees are cut and where we do prescribed fire and some of the restorative treatments.
So any competitors or indirect, direct, who are doing the same job as you, and how maybe are you guys better?
Well, really the competition is the status quo. And the status quo are these consultant driven processes where environmental consultants will get hired to run these 5, 10, 15 year paper based collaborative processes, or in internal labs for the USDA, for example, can act as internal consultants. So a fire expert inside the Forest Service can work with the state of California and say, here are all of your vulnerable communities. What they can't do is take it to, like, what do you do about it? What are the strategies that you design to mitigate this risk? And they can't help with how do you collaborate effectively with other landowners, private, state, federal, tribal lands that need to actually agree on what you do, what actions you take at that local level, to get consensus so you can get the permit to do the work. So I think again, like we talked about before, I think the behavior change is hard. People are used to doing things the same way. There is wide recognition that the status quo, we're going to lose everything. And so I think there's this clear need for a system like ours. People know about us. The more pioneering folks inside agencies like the Forest Service or NGOs are saying, "Yeah, bring it, bring it on! I want this thing." And others are kind of waiting and seeing, does this thing work? Is this the system? So anyway, hopefully that, that answers. We're getting there.
So what's next for Vibrant Planet, and maybe what keeps you up at night?
Um, Time. We're so out of time. From the broader climate perspective. It's 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 so difficult to see that this behavior change problem, and I want to help overnight, and it's like you have to go through these processes to build trust and credibility, and it can be maddening because it's like, oh my God, we let's do something, even if it's not perfect. Let's do something before my daughter can't go hike and backpack and ski in the forest that I love so much. So that's really the big thing, is just how do we do this faster? Like, how do we get people on board with behavior change? How do we align incentives? How do we educate people on our actions, and how we're all responsible for what's happening, right? You know, from the history of clear cutting the entire Western US and removing tribes and not allowing tribes to manage land the way they know how to manage it, to, you know, every time we eat beef in a restaurant that's industrial, we are directly cutting down the Amazon, and I don't think people understand that. So those are the things that I think about a lot, and trying to help create that sort of collective responsibility and knowledge and excitement that we know what to do. We just need to do it faster.
So my last question is a question I always ask to everyone on the show. I mean, what's your personal opinion of like on the climate crisis? I mean, what would be your words to the people who feel demoralized and by all the already visible consequences? I mean, are we doomed?
Depends on the day how I answer that question. Luckily, you know, spending my life in the solutions space, I am mostly hopeful. You know, there are so many things we can do. I mean, just in the nature-based solutions space, and it's really exciting to see. I mean, obviously the market has had this enormous correction and funding's tough and all those things, but I am seeing funding for our company, for the nature-based solutions space, and for climate solutions as a whole. It's still pretty steady and strong, and there's so many cool startups popping up to solve different parts of the problem. So I'm hopeful, and I would encourage listeners to jump in. It's all hands on deck, and there's a lot of opportunity to have a lot of impact, and also make a living while you're doing it. So
So how can our listeners, like investors, founders, experts, can help you guys?
Um, well, keep an eye on our website because we'll be doing some hiring soon. So if people are interested in our company and platform, we'd love to talk to you. Um, and yeah, and then funding, of course, will continue to raise money. And so if folks are interested in that, they can reach out to me as well. Um, and partnership, you know, where we are much more collaborative than we are competitive, and so where there are folks working on similar or synergistic um, plays, we are all ears to figure out where we can lock arms to do more together faster. So I'd say those are the three areas.
Fantastic. So any question I should have asked you for this first part of the interview that I did not have?
um, I don't think so. That's pretty thorough.
Thank you so much, Alison, for your time, for your incredible insight on the industry. I'm so excited again to see so many brilliant people like you taking, putting so much time and effort into finding a durable solution for our planet and fighting climate change. So thank you so much.
Thank you, and so appreciate you giving us a little bit of spotlight. Um,
You're welcome. Thanks again for joining us on the Tech for Climate podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show. Stay tuned next week for more climate tech insights. In the meantime, head on over to our webpage at startupbasecamp.org, where we have lots more insights and resources for anyone wanting to get involved in climate tech. If you find our resources useful, please consider donating to support our small self-funded team. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends, and see you next time.